stepping back a little bit and looking at the big picture, the current sort of health crisis that we're in, there's some sort of similarities to the 2008 crisis, but that was really a financial crisis. So we want to note that things are somewhat different now, although there were a lot of foreclosures in 2008. Here, what we're looking at is a health crisis, and 2008 was driven by bad loans. There was a lot of bad borrowers and loans that were poorly underwritten, and there was at the time limited cash in the marketplace to purchase distressed debt. So here in our current 2020 and looking ahead to 2021, a lot of the loans that are having trouble are really good loans with good underwriting, but various sectors are being severely impacted by the pandemic. Hotels and retail among the hardest hit, and we'll touch on that a little bit. And the good news is that there's lots of cash waiting to be deployed. So it's sitting on the sidelines, sort of looking to purchase distressed debt. One of the challenges that we're seeing is because there's so much cash, some of the people that have the cash to purchase distressed debt don't have a lot of experience with doing so, and so there's maybe some overbidding or some false assumptions about how to go about doing that. And we're here to help on the sort of acquisition side and also help lenders, because in 2008 sort of lots of foreclosures happened, but the lenders teams have largely been disbanded, so they're not in place to deal with the loan defaults that we're starting to see now.
So, right now there is distress in the marketplace. As Ian indicated, there is a lot of distress, particularly in retail, in the big box store arena. As you can appreciate, with shelter in place, a lot of purchasers, a lot of consumers are not going out into the public spaces. They are rather making their purchases. If they're making them at all, they're making them online. So a lot of these retail stores are suffering, even if they are fulfilling orders online. So, for example, in the retail arena, some notable Chapter 11 filings in 2020 really being triggered by the pandemic include Neiman Marcus, J. Crew, J.C. Penney, Ascena Retail, which they are the operator of Ann Taylor and Loft, Brooks Brothers, Lucky Brand, Pier 1, and then moving over into sort of like the health space, 24-hour fitness, Gold's Gym, Modell's, which is the sporting goods store, and then moving now into consumer goods like Sur La Table, the specialty cooking store that's based in Seattle, Washington. So a lot of distress there. Some of these brands will come out the other side with selling their businesses to other buyers. Some of these entities may close down partially, if not fully, and just simply liquidate. It's unclear right now what's going to happen with some of these entities, but clearly a lot of distress in the retail space, and then also in the restaurant space. You've got filings like California Pizza Kitchen, Sizzler, Ruby Tuesday. Those are significant chain restaurants, and then again, one of the things that's dragging them down are their lease obligations on these stores. It's just too much of a debt burden for them to handle, particularly when you don't have folks going to use these restaurants to enjoy the services that they're providing. Cinemas are also in great distress, as you can appreciate. No one's going to the movie theater these days, and who knows what that business is going to look like on the other side of the pandemic when you've got a lot of folks streaming movies. It's just, that's a communal event, and right now those kinds of events just aren't taking place. A couple of other notable chains, Le Pain Quotidien, which is, I think, based out of New York, but it's a bakery business, as is Maison Kaiser, which is from the Eric Kaiser, who's the renowned baker in France. So that was a U.S. Subsidiary that was doing well. High-end bakeries, you'd think that the bakeries, even in the time of the pandemic, would be able to survive, but those are suffering. And it looks like, for example, Maison Kaiser is going to simply close its U.S. operations. So lots of, again, distress, lots of opportunities for purchasers, and we can certainly help you navigate those waters. Ian?
Sort of looking at our current situation and the workouts arena, there's actually quite a lot happening in terms of workouts right now. The pandemic, right, is impacting everyone across lots of different sectors, and lenders are understandable and understanding the situation. They're willing to work with borrowers that come up with reasonable solutions. Key there is reasonable solutions. So early on in the pandemic, sort of March, April, when things started to shut down, we heard of borrowers sort of coming in with these sort of unreasonable demands and things that, sort of changing the terms of their loans. And what was most successful, the borrowers that had a sort of solid plan and were willing to work with the lenders to come up with something that was a kind of reasonable middle ground that both sides could live with. So some of the current market trends that we're seeing in the workouts space are fairly limited forbearance periods, 4 to 12 month range, 6 months being fairly standard, and that's a pause on payment. So the idea is that it would be a recapture of principal and interest after the end of the forbearance period during the later life of the loan. Lenders are typically requiring cash management agreements if they weren't in place already, and generally for the life of the loan as part of the workout, and meaning the lender gets to sort of be in control of the cash flow. Other things we're seeing in cash reserves, additional cash reserve requirements, or cash reserves put in place where there weren't any before. For other market trends, lenders are willing to waive various covenants in terms of ratios. So loan to value ratio, lenders realize that this is not really applicable right now, sort of given the current situation, and so they're willing to waive that covenant and waive other ratios where they're just not possible to be met right now. And then in terms of forbearance fees, lenders typically charge a fee in connection with the forbearance. Sort of historically, what we'd see is around 1% of the loan amount. Right now, it's more like around 0.5%, which is good news for borrowers. However, that this can still be problematic. Borrowers need to come up with that cash, make this payment, and it needs to be part of the initial plan that the borrower comes up with about how they're going to make this work when they approach the lender. Where's that cash going to come from? The lenders are typically not wanting to loan additional money for the fees in order to make the forbearance work. So that can be a challenge, and needs to be something that's sort of well planned out in advance in terms of the cash flow, and particularly for borrowers that have a single real estate asset and where all their cash is coming from that mall, and the mall is shut down because of the pandemic. They can really have a challenge on coming up with the additional cash just to be able to make the sort of forbearance and workout happen.
Thanks, Ian. So, the logical next step where the forbearance period has expired, the borrower is still not able to service the loan as those payments come due. Maybe the borrower continues to miss payments. The lender is then going to proceed perhaps with some other remedy. If the forbearance periods aren't going to be extended, then the logical next step for the lender is to foreclose on the loan. As you can appreciate, a lot of foreclosure efforts have been in moratorium. The courts have, well, for some period of time, the courts weren't even open, and now that the courts are reopened in most jurisdictions, for example, unlawful detainers, there's a backlog of those kinds of proceedings. Certainly we can file, if we're on the creditor side, we can file lawsuits for judicial and non-judicial foreclosure in California. We can proceed to recover against guarantors. A lot of those efforts, but as you can also appreciate, there's going to be a backlog of those kinds of proceedings in the court system, typically in the state courts, although you certainly can't proceed in federal court under certain jurisdictional guidelines and principles. But this is going to be a process that's going to be playing out in 2021 for certain, where you've got borrowers who may have had some surplus cash, as Ian indicated, but may choose to utilize that cash in other ways and maybe even jettison some of their real property holdings or certain locations. Those will be opportunities to perhaps even stipulate to some sort of repossession of the collateral rather than going through a prolonged foreclosure process. Of course, those kinds of negotiations should involve guarantors. We're certainly well positioned to assist with those kinds of negotiations, whether we're representing the borrower, the lender, the guarantor, the owner, and the like. Focusing on owners trying to kick out a tenant under an unlawful detainer proceeding, perhaps even in using and utilizing a receivership process to get the prior operator out, the tenant out, and get a new operator in, rather than simply taking over the premises and selling the property or the like. We can assist in those actions as well. We do a lot of receivership work, typically representing either the receiver or the owner of the facility, trying to bring a new operator in for whatever purposes, whether that's healthcare related, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's an operating business, a retail business. We can assist in those kinds of actions. Again, recognizing that there is a backlog of that kind of work, and in order to get to the top of the docket, we may need to utilize some ex parte proceedings to make sure that we get action sooner rather than later. Ian?
Some predictions and thoughts we have on sort of the impact that this will have, pandemic will have going forward on various sectors in terms of sort of real property and workouts and foreclosures. The retail sector, which Lou was just mentioning, there's likely to be some permanent changes. We saw this pre-pandemic, this sort of shift to shopping online, the Amazon effect, where brick and mortar retailers were struggling or having to sort of change their model of how they approach their business. And going forward, people are likely to do more online shopping, and this has just been accelerated by the pandemic, where everyone's at home shopping online. So malls that are not in prime locations are really struggling and may need to be reconfigured or rethought on in terms of who the anchor tenant is and what even the draw is. Looking at the hotel industry, another very hard hit sector due to the pandemic. Here we think hotels will return. The question really is just how long will it take? So business travel has come to a screeching halt due to the pandemic, and business travel, a lot of hotels rely on business travel as part of their revenue stream. So really it's just a question of timing and how long will it take before sort of business travel and tourism returns to what it was a year ago. And that's sort of to be seen. We don't really know yet, but it will recover at some point. It just will likely take several years and be a slow recovery for the hotel sector. Looking at offices, there will probably be some long-term impacts felt in the office sector. As difficult as working from home has been, especially those with children trying to do Zoom schooling and do work all in your small apartment. There's definitely some benefits to remote work and the flexibility associated with that. So we're thinking that in terms of offices, there will be long-term shifts, sort of more sort of flexible work schedules, more remote work. Does that mean that people are going to shrink their office footprints? Not necessarily. They might just have sort of less dense sort of workspaces within the same sort of larger footprint, but likely long-term impacts in connection with remote work. In the sort of multifamily apartment sector, there's been a sort of trend during the pandemic for people fleeing to the suburbs, getting out of the cities. It's unclear whether that's going to be a sort of long-term trend. We're on the sort of San Francisco Bay Area perspective, see the benefits of walkability and transit-oriented development, and think that there will still be a strong demand for that once things begin to reopen, and even folks that did move to the suburbs may be wanting to move back in another couple of years. So the shift sort of away from cities is likely temporary, is our prediction there. And in terms of industrial real estate, it's actually one of the sectors that's done fairly well and remained relatively stable during the pandemic. A lot of the sort of warehouse space, increased demand for that, sort of tied into the sort of online shopping, the warehouses that are well situated for that sort of last mile delivery, storage. Amazon and many other online retailers are utilizing more and more of that space. So the sort of warehouse industrial space has been fairly stable during the pandemic, and given the trends towards online shopping, we're imagining that this is going to continue.
Yeah, no, my final thought is that there are issues, but there are also opportunities. So if you're in distress, if your business in distress, we can assist you to relieve some of that stress, to help you strategize about how to exit and perhaps re-enter the marketplace in a different fashion. And if you're in acquisition mode, then there are going to be some significant opportunities for you to acquire lease space, to acquire real property, to reconfigure your business and the real property platform that you want to use for that business. And again, we're well positioned to assist those kinds of clients as well.